Nancy, actually our reluctant mystic, she is going to tell us more about that tonight, and she had an awakening in a massage therapist's office that changed 20 years ago. She wasn't very well versed in mystics or healing, so she sought out advice and found support from a rabbi, a reverend, and a doctor, and that pushed her in the right direction. So for over 20 years, she's been helping people and healing them. Her awakening gave her the gift of clairvoyance, and she's here to tell us tonight about it. So if you would put your hands together and welcome her, after all, Nancy Clasby.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's a great honor to be here in Arizona. My name is Nancy Torgove Clasby. I would like to take a moment to have everyone, you can have your eyes open or your eyes closed, just to take a minute to listen for the stillness around you. And imagine that you can bring that stillness inside of you, just for a moment, connecting to a power greater than yourself. Okay. So I had too many things to hold in my hand, so Howie is going to be changing the PowerPoint presentation for me. So I am a mother of 3. There's a picture on the left side of me, on the left, with my 3 children when they were younger, and now they're all grown up adults. And when I was a little girl, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a mother. And to me, that was the most important job that I could ever imagine. I had an out-of-body experience in 1996. And as a result of that, I became a healer and a meditation teacher. I've done meditation workshops. I am a member of the Greater Boston IANDS since 2012. I'm a recording artist of healing meditations, and I am an author of The Reluctant Mystic, Autobiography of an Awakening. It came out in 2016. So you guys are ahead of me a little bit. So what I wanted to do tonight was just start explaining to you what happened to me, which is a little bit different than a near-death experience, although much of it was the same, was very similar. So what I had was what is called a Kundalini awakening. And I had practiced yoga since the age of 18, but I had no idea what Kundalini was or what an awakening was. So tonight what I wanted to do is just begin by explaining to you a little bit about what a Kundalini awakening is. So a Kundalini awakening is a term from the yogic tradition for the power of the divine. She is the latent female energy believed to be coiled at the base of the spine. It is Kundalini who creates the universe. She's the creator of all creations, sometimes called the face of God. Now tonight when I move through my talk, I will be using the word God, but feel free to interchange that with whatever your belief systems tell you, because the words always fall short of the experience. But because I was raised in the Jewish tradition, that's the word that I feel most comfortable with. I will use other words as I move through the presentation, but when I do use the words, please remember that you can substitute that with anything that feels comfortable, so that it's a creator or a God of your understanding, not my understanding. So she's called the face of God, which I just love. I love that. She is the ultimate goal of all yogas, the awakened mind, the transcendent vision of saints and sages. By knowing her, all is known, and life is saturated with bliss. So the Eastern traditions revere Kundalini as the great mother, and I love that they use the feminine there, the great mother who gives birth to all. When our mind is saturated with her, we have a direct experience of our connection to all living creatures in the universe. And it's interesting that all spiritual traditions have a name for Kundalini. So Christians call her the Holy Spirit, Jews call her Shekhinah. Chi is the word used by the Chinese culture describing the life force energy that permeates the universe. Bodhicitta in Buddhism is the mind that knows empathy and compassion for the benefit of all beings. Spiritual seekers of all faiths, shamans, yogis, monks, priests, nuns, and many more ask to be shown the way to her. This is the most wonderful thing about her. She will appear to other people in the way that's the most comfortable for them. So if you grow up in the tradition of Christianity, she will show up to you in a form that makes you feel comfortable. If you grow up with Buddhism in your life, she'll show up to you in that form. The intelligence is so supreme that she can present herself to whoever is with her in a way so that they will feel the most comfortable. So for me as a Jew, she appeared as this incredible light, because in Judaism we don't see other deities. We see mostly just light. And so that's the way she appeared to me. So Kundalini is often used to refer to the power of the divine present in each person. And she showed up to me. It was a complete and utter surprise. So the next one that says Kundalini Awakening. So in a ritual, she can show up in a ritual that is called, she can show up in a ritual specifically designed for the transmittal of power, like initiation ceremonies. She can show up through different various yogic practices that have been practiced for over thousands of years, prayer, devotional practices, selflessly serving others, chanting, meditations, mantras, rituals, dancing, drums. And spontaneous Kundalini awakening can be precipitated by a near-death experience. It can be precipitated by pain or trauma, one-pointed concentration, in the dream state given through an initiation from a wise being. And this is what happened to me. It was initiated in a past life. So the way it was explained to me was, because I couldn't understand why I had received this tremendous gift. So the way it was explained to me by a dear friend of mine who is a Hindu psychiatrist who helped me get through a lot of this, he said that I had practiced for many, many lifetimes, and I had died right before the awakening. So that in this lifetime, the awakening showed up in me right before my 40th birthday. And in Judaism, the Kabbalistic texts that they use were only used by people who had reached the age of 40. They weren't allowed to look at the texts before that. And the reason was because it's so easy to, once you reach an awakening, to want to leave your body and stay where you are. But by the time you were 40, they figured that you were more grounded in your life. A lot of people had families and children, and so they weren't allowed to study the Kabbalistic texts until that age. And so that's what happened to me. And they say that Kundalini awakening is the greatest prize on the spiritual quest. And they talk about how the bliss or the ananda that comes to someone is a realization of the highest process, but it's not without peril. So some people who have had Kundalini awakenings, what happens in a Kundalini awakening is the energy starts to move up through your body. And they talk about, if you want to switch to the next slide, you'll see a picture of someone who is having a Kundalini awakening energetically. So at the base of the spine, they say there is 2 snakes that are coiled on either side of an energy center or a channel called the Sushumna, which runs up and down the spinal cord. And some of you might be familiar with the chakra system, which means wheels of light. And they're energy centers that run up and down the body. And there's 7 main centers that run up from the base of the spine all the way up to the top of the head. So what happens when the Kundalini starts to rise and the snakes start to uncoil, they start to pierce the energy centers as they come up, and all kinds of things start to happen. And someone who has a Kundalini moving up their spine and it doesn't get all the way up to the top of their head, say it gets stuck at their heart center or in their throat center, can wind up in psychiatric wards and are very often rendered pretty much useless for the rest of their lives. I saw a man in the last couple of years who had a Kundalini awakening that went awry, and he left his wife, his children. He spent most of his days lying on the floor, looking at the ceiling. He went to neighboring towns, gave all of his money away because he was so connected to this mystical oneness, but that it wasn't a complete transformation. So they say that it's best to, if you're interested in learning about Kundalini, to learn about it with a Kundalini master, a Kundalini teacher. Well, that's not what my course was, but it did really work out beautifully for me. I was incredibly lucky and very well guided and guarded throughout the entire process. So if the Kundalini doesn't rise up and there isn't a clear rising, there can be a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. But if the Kundalini process is clear and moves all the way up through the top of your head, it's very similar to many near-death experiences in that you are in a state of bliss, a place of incredible light and profound peace. And there's an internal knowing. I call them knowings because there's not a shred of doubt in any cell. There wasn't a shred of doubt in any cell in my body that I was connected to every other living creature in the universe. So if you want to move on just a little bit, I wanted to explain a little bit about what a mystic is. A mystic is someone who's had a direct experience of their creator. And I believe that every major religion was started with someone who was sitting on the side of a mountain or sitting out in nature somewhere, and inside of them unfolded this incredible experience of a divine connection. So I wanted also to explain a little bit about the difference between a medium, a channel, a psychic, and a mystic. And I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with what a medium, a channel, and a psychic are, but not necessarily a mystic. So I wanted to say that a medium is someone who has chosen to be the medium between the living and souls who have passed on to give comfort and closure to the living. A channel is someone who allows a spirit to merge with them, thus allowing the spirit to speak through them. A psychic is someone who uses extrasensory perception to identify information hidden from our 5 senses. A mystic is someone who has had a direct experience of creation and the interconnectedness of all forms of life. So here's the thing. A mystic often receives the gifts of a medium, a channel, or a psychic, but not always. A mystic may receive the gifts that sound magical, but the main and most important message of someone who has had a mystical experience is a deep connection to their creator and to all other living creatures, and I say in the universe. So that's a little bit of a forward, a little bit of an explanation of what Kundalini is, how it is the same and a little bit different from a near-death experience. And now I wanted to move on just a little bit to the next slide. And what happened to me was, when I was 12 years old, I had incredible back pain. And from the ages of 12 to 16, I was unable to walk or sit. I had long periods of time where I was being tutored at home, and I was too young for them to open me up. My neurosurgeon wanted to wait until I was 16, until I had stopped growing, and because it was before there were MRI machines, I had to wait for 4 years living with this unbearable pain. And so I had this back pain for many, many years, and I had my first surgery at 16. I had a second surgery right before my 50th birthday, and then I had another back surgery, a third one, in the exact same place right before my 60th birthday a few years ago. And what I learned through all of this excruciating pain from such a young age was so enormous. I believe that we're given all of our physical ailments so that we can start to learn about the really big stuff in life. So I had to learn about patience, letting go, powerlessness, compassion, kindness, all of the things that were really important. I had to learn at a very young age. I learned how to, as a young girl, I learned how to leave my body and go to the ceiling of my room because I could get away from the pain that way. And then I learned that I could leave my body, go to the ceiling of my room, and then go out of the house. And we lived on the ocean, so I was able to fly around and see what was going on out in the ocean. I learned how to take the pain that I was in and move right into the center of it and breathe through it. And when I was breathing through that pain, I was able to connect to a creator much greater than anything I could ever imagine. So I had this incredible pain for most of my life, off and on, but it taught me all the things that I really needed to learn. And obviously I'm not finished because I had another surgery about a little over just a few years ago. So what I did was, when I was 18, I started a yoga practice. I started going to acupuncturists and chiropractors and really started practicing the healing arts because they really didn't have a lot of answers for me. So I have a 40-year-old, maybe 40-plus-year-old yoga practice, and I became very well acquainted with the healing arts, trying to find other ways to deal with the pain that I was living with. And there was about, in 1995 or 1996, I started seeing an acupuncturist and a new massage therapist. So I was seeing both of them every week. And over a period of 6 weeks, my body started shaking. And I had no idea why it was shaking involuntarily. But I knew that it felt really good while it was happening, but I was a little bit embarrassed because I couldn't really control it. And what I found out later was that that was the Kundalini was rising. And as it was rising, it was creating vibrations inside of my body, and that was the shaking. Much later, I learned that the universe is made up of contractions and expansions. So all over the world, we see out in nature, we see the rising of the tides coming in and out. We see the night moon changing. We see the night sky changing. We see the moon waxing and waning. And it's through these great contractions and expansions. We see now that I'm here in Arizona and seeing this incredible flowering display of brilliance. So we see it through the seasons. Well, what was happening to me was more of a microcosm of those expansions and contractions. And much later on, I found out that they call that a body orgasm. And it's funny because our society has gotten everything confused, so they use that word in more of a sexual way. But really, it's creation that happens inside of us and outside of us on a daily basis. The greatest creation on earth happens always. And that's what was happening inside of me. And finally, at the end of 6 weeks, it culminated in an out-of-body experience. And I'm just going to read a little bit from my book. It says, in 1996, I had an out-of-body experience that left me with the understanding of the universe and how we're all bound by unconditional love. This in turn led to my becoming a healer, and I have since helped hundreds of people deal with cancer and other life-threatening diseases. In that moment, I was given the gift of grace, an internal spiritual awareness of generosity, compassion, forgiveness, and joy that transcended anything I had ever felt before. It was given to me generously and with great loving kindness. I had no idea what was to come, but I felt this overwhelming responsibility to do something with the gift. I kept thinking, why me? Why would this happen to me? And my dear friend, who's this Hindu psychiatrist, much later explained why that had been given to me. So let's see, where are we? We can maybe change it on to the next slide. So before we get to the after effects of the awakening, I am going to read one more paragraph about what happened to me. The experience I was having is beyond the limits of language, but I'll do my best to explain it. I was having what I now know was an out-of-body, transcendent experience. Okay, so I saw two visions going on. I was in a room that had a tin ceiling, and my eyes were looking up at the tin ceiling. But at the same time, I had a movie going on right here that I could see. So I was seeing two things at the same time. And the movie was an incredible, all-encompassing light. It was everywhere, inside of me and outside of me. I was in it, and it was in me. It took my breath away. It was so brilliant that I couldn't look at it full on. It was everything and nothing all at once. It was all-knowing, all loving, all kind. It was all powerful, but not at all scary. I felt completely accepted and loved. I felt as though I was truly home. I felt all of humanity in those vibrations, and I knew from the inside out that we're all connected. I understood the truth of being alive in a human body and all that our lives present us. On that day, I felt an unconditional, all-encompassing, all-knowing love. This love was so enormous that it blew apart the physical world. It melted everything for me. So, some of the things that happened during and after that were confusing, but for some reason, I was led to the most incredible people that helped me. But a lot of unusual things happened to me before I had any intellectual understanding of what it was. So some of the things that happened to me was, one thing was that I wasn't able to eat or drink anything for 3 months, and I didn't sleep. I stayed awake all night long. I was so connected to this highway, this interconnectedness of unconditional love, and it was feeding me, and all the energy was coming in through the top of my head and down through my throat, and I couldn't get anything else to come in, and so it was feeding me. And I know, I was just at home trying to be a good Jewish mother. I had these 3 little kids, 3, 6, and 9 at the time, and I remember thinking, really? You've got to be kidding me. Could you please find someone else to do this? I'm so busy. I just don't have time for all of this. When I came home from the drive home from that massage therapist's office, who, by the way, had no idea what happened, the experience was mine, and the massage therapist was completely out of the picture. So I was driving home, and I had to sit in my car for over an hour after the experience. I could not figure out how to put my hands on the steering wheel or how to get the key in the ignition, because the entire physical world melted for me. So it felt like I could put my hands through walls. And it took me a long time. I would be at the house, I would hear the phone ringing, but I couldn't figure out how to get my hand on the phone to pick it up. So you can see how this could very easily be confused with some kind of a psychotic break or a mental illness. So on the way home from that drive that day, I noticed that I could see energy fields around all living things. And again, it was the vibration, it was the swishing. I could hear the vibrations and I could see it. So if I looked at a tree, I could look at the branches and the leaves, and I could see the energy fields around all of them. And they, again, the vibration and the light was there. I could, if I saw people in the street, I could see what they were, what their interaction was with another person. So if they were in love, I saw these big pink puffy clouds. I thought, oh my God, I've gone to a Disney World movie in my head. What is going on? And yet I was looking at things and knowing things. One of the things that happened to me was I could see halos around people's heads. And in the halos, I could see all the physical things of their lives. So I could see what cars they drove, how many children they had, if they were married or not married, what their homes looked like. And then what would happen, it would be a physical manifestation in my mind's eye. I would see it would melt and into nothing. And I could see that none of those things were important. And what would be left would be the light that was coming out of people's eyes. So when I looked into their eyes, I could see their spirits, I could see their souls, I could see what was there, what was missing. So you can see how some of this might be confusing. And then one day, I would say probably after about 6 months of all of these things happening, I sat down on the edge of my bed and I turned on the television. And I'm really not a big television watcher. Plus, I had 3 little kids. I didn't have time for that. I turned on the television and there was a 1946 movie on called The Razor's Edge. And it was a Gary Cooper movie. And in the movie, he goes, he's in a foreign land, and a teacher, a wise teacher, a lama, comes and takes him up to the top of a mountain. And he leaves him at the top of the mountain. And I just saw a little clip of the movie. It was like it was perfectly planned for me, I'm sure. The clip was Gary Cooper, and he is in a little one-room place on the top of this mountain, and some time passes, and the Lama comes back to get him. And the Lama looks into his eyes, and he says, "Oh, my son, I see you've changed." And Gary Cooper goes into this monologue of how he left his body, he went to this place of indescribable beauty, the light was everywhere, and he wanted to stay there forever, but there was something that was calling him back down to earth. And I burst into tears and I said, I now have some language around my experience. So I called my rabbi, and he saw me that very day, and we went, I was able to talk to him, and I told him my experience. And I said to him, do you think that I went crazy? And he said, you know, Nance, I'm going to have to get back to you on this one, because he had an inkling of what was going on, but he wasn't used to any kind of experience of people coming to talk to him about mystical experiences. And I didn't have the word mystical yet in my vocabulary. So the next day he called me back, and I went to his office, and he said, you know, Nance, you had what we call a mystical experience. And he started showing me examples of that in the Torah and in the Bible, of when Jacob climbed the ladder to heaven. And he gave me all these biblical stories of when people had had awakenings, when Moses received the 10 Commandments. So one of the things that I could do was, much to my surprise, I went to the library and there was no internet and there was really no one else for me to call. I went to the library and I took that one word, mysticism or mystic, and I came home with piles of books. And honestly, if this didn't happen to me, I wouldn't believe it. So if you're skeptics out there, that's fine with me. I would probably be shaking my head along with you. But I could put my hands on those books and all the information in the books flew off the pages into my heart. It was like they flew from the pages into my heart center as though I had written them all, because remember, I was completely connected on this highway of interconnection. And I was completely connected to all other living creatures in the universe. So what they had written, I had written. And I started really understanding that what we do to ourselves, we do to others, and what we do to others, we do to ourselves. So I learned a lot about my experience through putting my hands on books. And when I would go into houses of worship, I could feel the vibration of all humanity in those places of worship. I could feel the sadness, the grief, the despair, the joy, the hope, the bliss, the unconditional love, all wrapped up. And I was brought to, in those first few years, I called them tears of knowing. I was crying all the time, but it wasn't tears of sadness. They were tears of understanding. And the compassion welled up in me as though I were feeling everyone else's feelings. There were a lot of other experiences that I had. One thing that I saw, which I didn't really know until many years later was a real thing. This is what would happen. I would have an experience, and then later on I would find out that, oh, other people have had these experiences. And in fact, there are books written about them. So I still see this. They say when you're fully enlightened, the entire universe is bathed in this incredible blue light. But for me, what happened was I saw what is called the blue pearl. And the blue pearl would show up, right? Well, you don't have to change it. Oh, yeah, there it is, the blue pearl. A little tiny blue sesame seed would show up for me whenever I was in complete understanding of the very highest part of me. And so it turns out many years later that a lot of the great yogis experienced the blue pearl. And I'm sure that I had been indoctrinated in other lifetimes in the yogic tradition, in the Hindu religious ceremonies. And so the blue pearl still shows up for me. And I'll give you an example of what the blue pearl does for me. I have had a healing practice for over 20 years, and a woman came to see me, a pretty young woman, fairly young woman, also pretty, but she had breast cancer. And she walked in to where my healing table is, and right above her, I saw the blue pearl. And the blue pearl was telling me that she was going to be okay. Now, she was terrified. She had 3 little kids. But I could say to her quite confidently, Lisa, you're going to be okay. They just told me you're going to be okay. You don't have to worry. And many years later, she's, cancer-free, living a wonderful life. Her kids have all graduated from college. So the blue pearl would show up to tell me different things, and I would be able to intuit. So whenever it shows up, I have to really pay attention. Now remember, our thoughts are always layered. We have so many thoughts going on, and usually the loudest ones are the fear-based ones, or I have an itch, or I have a pain. Sure, they're in the past, but our thoughts are layered, but we're always connected up here to the highest part of who we are. So when that blue pearl shows up, I have to let go of all the other mind chatter and figure out, I don't have to really figure it out, it's usually given to me pretty clearly of what it is. So those are some of the things that came along with some of the psychic abilities, the clairvoyance, clairsentience, the clairaudience, the ability to hear, see, and feel things. happened to me quite often. The spirit world would show up for me. Sometimes people would come to my healing table and there would be a loved one there with a message. A couple of times I had loved ones from the spirit world come and drop into my body so that they could help with the healing for their loved ones. I had a wonderful woman who was an artist, and her husband had died. She woke up one morning and her husband was dead in her bed, and they had a little baby, and she subsequently got breast cancer. And she was on my healing table one day, and her husband tapped me on the shoulder from the spirit world and said, "Is it okay with you if I come in and help with this healing? I'd really like to use your hands." And I said, "Okay." And he was lovely. And when she came back from the healing, I told her what had happened. I was able to describe what he looked like, what his hands looked like, and so it was all accurate. So a lot of these things happened as a result of all of the energy centers being opened up for me. So there was a lot of the second sight stuff that went on. After about, I would say 10 years or so, my kids were getting a little bit older, and I was becoming exhausted from seeing and hearing and knowing. And I asked for some of those psychic abilities to be taken away from me because it was really hard to live in the world with all of that was going on and still try to be a regular person, still try to be available for my children and my parents. And so it did slow down quite a bit after I asked for that. But if you want to go to the next slide, I did want to mention that I went to see my rabbi, who was wonderful. I really only saw him a few times. I saw him that very first time, and he recommended, within a few weeks, a man who was a Hindu psychiatrist who lives in Calgary, a man named Dr. Badri Ricky, who really, really helped put a lot of my visions and my dreams and my experiences into words, because most of what I experienced was experiential. And I like to explain it like this. When you're watching television, you see this flat screen, and it's just that one dimension. And then you pull yourself away from the screen, and you're living your life, and you have all these other dimensions all around you. Well, when you leave your body, there are many other dimensions that are impossible, almost impossible to describe because they don't exist here, so we don't have language for a lot of those experiences. So Dr. Ricky was very instrumental in helping me. And I also met a lovely woman who was a Catholic nun, and she met and fell in love with the Monsignor in the Catholic Church. So they left the Catholic Church and became Episcopalian ministers. And she met with me once a week for counseling to help me with the experiences that I was having. And each one of them grounded me in their different traditions. And unbeknownst, they never spoke to each other. And so unbeknownst to each one of them, they all had decided that I had had a mystical experience and that I was living the life of a mystic. I will be forever grateful to them because I hear now, many years later, people who have had experiences similar to mine but didn't have the resources that were available to me. So it was almost like it was perfectly planned out. There was no fear. There was a little bit of confusion, but mostly it was a wonderful experience for me. I was very, very gifted in so many ways. So these three people, and I have a funny little cartoon up there that I like. You can read it. I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Some holy man. Dude's got it all backwards." And they have the two cows looking at him as he's saying Om. So Patricia Long, who was the minister that helped me, took me to, she said, Nancy, we're going to be doing a healing service at my church. Would you like to come and help with the healing? And I said, yeah, I really would. So Dr. Ricky and I had talked a lot about what could I do with all these gifts. You know, there were a lot of different choices for me to make, and what would be a good way for me to use this gift. And Patricia invited me to a healing service, and only one person came to the healing service. But when she walked in the room, I could see the energy field around her. And when I put my hands on her, again, much to my surprise, I noticed that I could see inside of her body with my hands. And I could see what was in there. I could see she was very, very sick. I could feel the energy moving through the top of my head, down through my body, out through my arms, out to heal her. Now, I like to say that everyone that comes to my healing table has some kind of a spiritual healing, not always a physical healing, because a physical healing is not always what's needed for that spirit. I believe that we have to all move through what we've decided upon with our Creator. And since I'm not the Creator, it would be incredibly presumptuous for me to think that I could actually heal anyone. What I do is I lead people to a place of stillness, and that's where they meet their Creator, and they're able to, in that stillness, begin to understand what their purpose is and what their journey is going to be. So at that very first healing, I thought to myself, this is it. This is what I'll be doing for the rest of this lifetime here. I will be using my hands and my words and using my internal experiences and the gifts that were given to me to help other people heal. And again, when I do my healing, it's more about me bringing the person back to themselves so that they can remember their goodness, their kindness, their sense of humor, their generosity. Because when we begin to slow down the mind and we open the heart center, we're able to come to that place of stillness inside of us that allows us to remember who we truly are. Like after I had that awakening, I do remember when I finally drove home that I looked into the mirror, and for the very first time in my life, I could see who I was. It felt like I was swimming inside of my own eyes. So for me to be able to bring even a sliver of that to other people was the gift that I wanted to pursue. And I started my healing practice. I worked for the first few years for free. I would have done anything to do my healing work. And it's been over 20 years now. I still work very quietly. It wasn't until I wrote this book a few years ago that I really came out of the closet in a bigger way. I was able to share my experiences with people who were coming to me for help, and my children, my immediate family, my close friends, they all knew. But it took a good 20 years for me to ground myself in the experience that I had had so that I could really come out and explain it to other people. I knew I would write the book someday, and I knew that I would be given the opportunity to come and share my experiences with other people. So if you want to just move it on just a little bit. Oh, wait, before you do, well, we can go back to one more. Oh, this was something I wanted to mention. The angel of death. Oh, my gosh. The angel of death would come to my healing table, and the angel of death was absolutely magnificent. It was a big, huge spirit, and it would come to the right side of my table, down by the foot of the person that was getting ready to move on. Now, I never told anyone what was going on because, again, I'm not their creator, and I could never be so presumptuous to assume anything about their journey. but I would see the angel of death. And it was quite magnificent, not at all scary, just a brilliant, brilliant light. And it would be there for sometimes weeks, months, even a few years, waiting for the person that was getting ready to cross over. And I have kind of a funny story about that too. In the beginning, I used to take my table, my healing table, to other people's homes. And I was working with a man who was a bank president. Imagine that, a bank president. And he was getting healings from a spiritual healer. So it was a big, big stretch for him. But his wife was behind that. And I'd bring my table in and set it up. And they had a very formal living room that we set up the table in. At the end of the living room, there was a fireplace. And on either side of the fireplace were these two Chinese chairs. And they were straight back, they looked very uncomfortable. And when I would do the healings with him, when my eyes were closed, in my third ear, which is in the middle of your forehead, sometimes you can feel it between your, sometimes in both places, I would see a Chinese couple, an elderly Chinese couple, and they were sitting with traditional Chinese garb on. And so I thought to myself, you know, I'm really not going to tell this bank president what's going on here because he is totally not going to get this. But one day we would go in, and I always washed my hands in cold water after the healings. And so his wife Barb and I went into the kitchen. We would wash our hands and we would chat a little bit. And I finally said, you know, Barb, I'm just going to tell you what I'm seeing. You can do with it what you like, but I don't think we should tell Randy about it. And she said, no, we're not going to tell him. So I told her. So Randy lived much longer than he was supposed to live. And they got to do some traveling. And anyways, one day, he has this. Can you hear me? Okay. So one day I got a phone call. And it was Barb. And she said, Nancy, I want you to sit down. I said, okay, I'm sitting down. She said, well, you know, Randy's been being taken care of by hospice now. I hadn't seen him for a few weeks. He got sicker and sicker. And she said, I was walking by his room, and I heard him carrying on a conversation. And I looked in, and his eyes were closed, but he was talking. So I went into the room, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, honey, who are you talking to? She said, he sat up bolt right in his bed, opened his eyes, and said to me, oh, I'm talking to this elderly Chinese couple. They're helping me get my affairs in order before I leave. And then he went right back out. So it was, you know, it's comical. I mean, the God of my understanding has a great sense of humor. When I would be experiencing these things, I would say, oh, God's throwing me a bone, you know, just like some confirmation that the experiences I was having were real. They were based in reality. And I knew when I left my body that day that that was the most real thing that had ever happened to me and probably ever will happen to me. And that everything here is an illusion. And it's a play for us to play out who we are and to help us become greater versions, so that when we leave here, we are more expanded versions of who we already are when we come here. And in Judaism, they say when a baby is born, the veil is brought down over their eyes. And the process of living is raising that veil so that we can truly understand who we are. And once we understand who we are, we know how incredibly perfect we are in every way, and how lovely and loving and lovable we are. And so that helps us to then go out into the world and create a better place. So back to now to the next, after the angel of death, now you can move forward a little bit, and we're going to go just to some of my clients. And I'm not going to get into their stories so much, except to say that I've worked with people from all walks of life. A lot of times people come to, I say I'm a bottom feeder. People come to me when they've tried everything else, and oh, well, you know, nothing else has worked. I might as well try the healer. So I've had people, a lot of people that have had cancer in various stages of cancer. Some people have crossed over, some are still here. ALS. Broken bones are pretty easy to work with. They're very easy because they're so solid and I can see them pretty clearly. Surgery prep. I love to do surgery prep. People that I've had 7 surgeries. Every time I've gone in for a surgery, it's been the very best day of my life because, first of all, they found out what was wrong. They had a way of fixing it. And then we live in a place where medical facilities, nurses, doctors, medicine, healers, therapists, you name it. We have everything here. So if you have something that's wrong with you and they can actually fix that, to me, that was an incredible gift. If I hadn't had my back surgeries, I would have had a much different life than I'm having today. So in fertility, I love working with mothers that are bringing babies into the world. And I've worked with, I just worked with a woman now who is a doctor. She's 41. She did in vitro fertilization repeatedly. It didn't take, and we took time for her to relax and to create a beautiful place inside of her for a spirit to come into. And she's pregnant now. She's has terrible morning sickness, but she's so happy that she's finally pregnant. Definitely anxiety and depression. I mean, the world is a really hard place to be, and it's not for the weak of heart. People, the spirits that come down here and incarnate into a human body, it's quite something. So depression and anxiety. I work a lot with gratitude. I encourage people to have gratitude journals. We work on changing distorted thinking. I give them all kinds of things to do that they can replace, kind of like switching the channel in your brain to be able to replace the negative thinking with the positive thinking. And a lot of times that negative thinking comes to us, you know, from fear-based, well-intentioned, sometimes well-intentioned, generational parents, grandparents, it's been passed down. And so we look at those well-worn grooves and we start to replace the well-worn grooves with new ways of thinking. I'm definitely not a speaking therapist, and I tell everybody that right up front. So when people come to see me, I pretty much get them on my healing table as quickly as possible. Sometimes they fill in the blanks a little bit, but oftentimes the less I know, the easier it is for me to work. And the body will tell me, or the spirit will tell me, or the spirit world will tell me what it is we need to work on. And then if you want to skip ahead to the next slide, another very cute little cartoon that says, "Are you not thinking what I'm not thinking?" And you can see there's a picture of a brain before meditation and a brain after meditation. And our thoughts are what make us sick, part of what makes us sick. So our negative thinking creates diseases inside of us because it's very constricting. It can tie knots in us. But when we start changing our thoughts and creating healthy thoughts, we're able to create a healthier body. And so I use meditation in a healing way. I like to teach healing meditations, and at every healing that I do one-on-one, I always start with gentle meditations just to get the mind to begin to slow down and to rest the brain. Allow your brain to rest. And when the brain rests, everything magical happens in the body. The whole body starts to rest. The immune system is able to work better. The central nervous system starts to slow down. And there's a whole scientific background of what happens when the mind begins to rest. So I love being able to teach that. And when I do teach meditation, and I have taught it for many years in small groups, large groups, very large groups, I can feel the energy because I'm an energy worker. Also, I can just feel the energy going from here all the way down, and you can see everybody beginning to slow down. Their shoulders come down away from their ears. Their hands and their feet begin to unclench. Their jaws begin to soften and open. And you can see a huge physical change. I've had a couple of clients that have brought now I can't remember what it's called when they're blood pressure monitors, thank you. And so they would check their blood pressure before and after a healing. And you can see there's a huge difference in this. And it's a beautiful place to start with your healings, with healing yourself through meditation. And then let's see, I think there's one more. Okay, so this is just a little bit more that I wanted to read to you a little bit. Many of the people, and this is from my book, many of the people I've worked with over the years have recovered from their diseases. Many have extended their lives. Some have moved into their deaths peacefully, partly because I've been able to share with them what happened to me. They have all been healed on some level, be it physical, emotional, or spiritual in nature. After the awakening, it took me many years to integrate the whole thing and really commit to being here in a physical form on Earth. So there was a period of years where I was going to my rabbi occasionally and saying, I want to go home. I know how to get there. I found the portal once. I want to go home. But I had these 3 children that were looking at me and really needed my help, and I knew there was a lot more that I still needed to do. So I knew that the draw to go home was always going to be there, and that that light was always going to be enormous and an enormous draw for me. But I knew that it wasn't my time and that I still yearned to go home. And I say to all my clients that are dying before me, I want a big party when I get there. And they would walk into my healing room and say, you know, you're really the only person that's really happy about me leaving this place, you know, because I know where they're going. And I can promise you, I can't promise you many things, but I can promise you that this is not the end. That when we cross over, it's a whole new beginning for us. And it's going to be, for each and every one in this room, one of the most magnificent experiences that you've ever had. Death for me is as exhilarating as birth. And I hope that I have been able to allay any of your fears, although probably if you're here, you're already on a path to knowing some of this. And I would say to each and every one of you to continue to explore and learn who you are, to grow into greater versions of yourself, and then go out there and give your gifts away to other people that are experiencing pain or fear or confusion. And very grateful to be here tonight. Thank you. When you talk to me?
Sure. Hey, I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Nancy. Hey, so about 13 years ago, I had Kundalini awakening, and it's been physically painful ever since then, in many different ways, like all sorts of different forms and illnesses and whatever. And I just, I'm hoping I can get in touch with you and just maybe get some guidance or have a session or whatever at some point, because I've found very few people that have navigated the journey successfully, that have been through the whole thing and knew what they were talking about and weren't just talking about it from a academic point of view or whatever. So
absolutely,
that'd be helpful.
I'll give you my number. I
Thanks a
have
lot.
cards here, so I'll
That'd
give
be
you a
great.
card.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Another question?
I'm curious about when you actually were on the table, you said the therapist had no idea what was going on, so you were shaking internally, And you were having this incredible...
No, I was shaking externally too. I mean, you could see me shaking. I
So-
couldn't stop the shaking though.
And when you drove home, you were having difficulty. How did you manage all of that? Because if you couldn't figure out how to put your hands on the wheel and then drive a car after that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really something.
So it was just, and so while you were having this experience, you were seeing shards of light. I think I read something like that. And so you were just not even here. You were gone.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That was my curiosity.
Anybody else want to go first? Yeah, okay. So I didn't know in Kabbalism that they have talk of Kundalini. Is that in the training, or is it just
no,
they
it's
just
not
know
part of the
about
Jewish
it?
tradition.
Okay,
No.
gotcha.
But there are different forms of awakenings that happen in all different traditions.
My name's Otto. I have a question.
Hi.
Hi. I read your book, and I could see the difference with. Love the way you set boundaries, and I'm not here to do magic tricks or to people that come in to want to get physical healing, right away. That you differentiated between spiritual healing and physical healing and emotional healing. I love that you set that boundary, and you could say clearly that I'm coming with peace and stillness. One of the things, though, I've done healing work. One of the things I notice is when sometimes my hands get hot. I've asked in prayer, what does that mean? And I've been told it's love and it's light. So I'm wondering, when you put your hands on somebody and you pray and anoint them with oil, and then that happens, the heat comes in. Could that be kind of the combination, this unconditional love you spoke a lot about in your book, and the light, this photonic energy that you see glows around all the saints and Jesus, all the pictures? Is that what you're bringing through to the patient in healing?
Yes, I can address that. First of all, when I work on someone who's really, really sick, I'm sitting still, and I hate to sweat. I can break out into a full sweat because I'm bringing in so much energy. So the person that's on the table, I don't use my own energy. If I used my own energy, I would be flattened. But because I'm drawing in an energy that's much greater than anything we could ever imagine, if someone's really, really sick, a tremendous amount of heat will pour through me. I had once I started sleeping again, I was having lots of mystical dreams and visions. And one of the dreams I had, the spirit world took me to, and I just read about it this last week. They have, if you get the IANDS newsletter, there was a woman who shared her experience, and the exact same thing happened to me, and I had never heard of it happening to anyone else. But this will explain a little bit of it to you. They took me to this big white room. It was a huge, enormous white room, and in the room, people were lying on what were similar to massage tables. And above them, there it looked like a machine of some sort, and it was scanning their bodies. And so what they were telling me was that in the future, there won't be surgeries, there won't be pharmaceuticals. They will repair people's energy fields with light and vibration. And so once the energy fields are repaired, there won't be any tears or snags in the energy fields for the disease to move into the physical body. So to answer your question, when I work with people who are on my healing table, I'm working with light and vibration. And that's what they were showing me. They're actually going to, it'll be magnified to what I am able to reproduce using a human body.
Question back here.
Does that help? Oh, absolutely. It's all love.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. My name is Phil.
Hi.
I am very, very interested in hearing more about the Blue Pearl. If there's anything additional that you could share.
Yes, there's a book written about it by Swami Muktananda, and it's called The Blue Pearl. It's the seed of consciousness, and you can read all about it. It's a beautiful book. And if you Google the Blue Pearl, which we didn't have the internet then, you'll find a lot of information about the Blue Pearl on the internet now. But look for books written about the Blue Pearl, and that one will come up. Swami Muktananda.
Question?
My name is Mary Ellen.
Hi, Mary Ellen.
Hi. I have two questions. One with regards to the shaking. Is that always about the Kundalini, about the chakras opening, or is that like unwanted things moving through, like just discharging?
I think there's other kinds of shaking. You know, when you get cold, you shake, you shiver. I mean, there are other types of shaking.
And during a healing session is specifically what I was thinking, but
If you are getting worked on or you're working on someone. If you're getting worked on, I don't know the exact answer to that.
okay. Second question is, I also do some form of healing work, and I think I'm a newbie. And people will tell me how much heat, my clients will tell me how much heat they experience or just feel so much energy, and I won't feel anything. But I am asking for their angels and guides to help me, and my angel and guides to help me. So I'm assuming it's coming through and they're feeling it, and I'm just not. I don't give some.
Well, a lot of times if you're really paying attention to the person that's on the healing table, you'll notice that their breathing will change or something will pop open. You might hear popping. Like for me, I hear popping. I see bodies moving. I've seen bodies jump completely off of the table. I had a man who was on a respirator who came in, and I had my hands on his lungs for about 45 minutes, and it popped open, and he literally jumped off the table, and then he walked out without the respirator. So you can actually see it. When I work, I'm paying attention. It doesn't look like I'm doing anything, but I'm paying attention to breathing, to any slight movement, to any vibration that's moving around. A body a body part will pop open, and you'll see it. Does that help?
Somewhat. So I mean, I guess I'm looking for an acknowledgement that I shouldn't worry about it. Like what's there,
no.
like
If you set your intention, the thing of it is it has to be an intention for the greatest good of all.
yes.
And I always start every healing asking for allowing me to be as though I were a hollow log to channel that energy.
Yes.
So that I don't get my stuff all mixed up in there.
One more would be any suggestions for how to enhance those flares.
Enhance what?
The flare, like I would love to be able to see energy, and I don't, and I kind of feel it. So are there things I can do that you've learned that will help that?
I know there's lots of books written about auras and energy healing, all types of energy healing. Polarity, Reiki, cranial sacral therapy, homeopathy, acupuncture, all of it's energy healing. Flower essences, it's all energy healing.
Question back here.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your beautiful presentation. My name is Anita.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question about Kundalini and twin flames, if you have any insights of that.
Kundalini
And meeting your twin flame. I just met my twin flame, and it apparently also can, start your Kundalini process. And
I'm so sorry, but I can't understand what you're saying. Kundalini and
twin flame, meeting your twin flame, which is not soulmate, but twin flame.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay.
That's why I couldn't understand it.
Yeah. Well,
I've never heard of that before.
Oh, I see. Well, it's basically you share the same consciousness, and it's the same soul, and it's like spread into two parts, and it's like a person. your divine masculine or feminine, and it also creates your, like a Kundalini or awakening. So I was wondering, because I just met one and it's crazy. So I just wanted to know.
I don't know anything about
Okay.
that. It's the first time I've ever heard of that, but I'm going to look that up tonight
Okay,
or
thank
tomorrow.
you.
Thank you.
Another question. By the way, I had a client years ago that was going through Kundalini, and her Kriyas went on for 2.5 years.
Yes.
How long did your Kriyas go on? Kriyas, that's the shaking that you have when you go
The
through Kundalini.
shaking and also the spontaneous yoga poses, the asanas. It went on for, I would say, a couple of years.
I heard you say 3 months or something.
But for me,
before.
I understood the Kriyas is not the shaking, but the Kriyas for me were spontaneous yoga poses. Not the shaking. Was it the breathing? No. No, for me, the Kriyas were asana, were the physical poses.
Any more questions? Dan's got another one.
Hey, I'm Dan.
Hey, Dan.
So the Kriyas off of that, have you ever heard of, or did you have any? I've met a few people that have had this thing where they have this urge to go and kind of do like I don't know what to call it, like a Kundalini dance. It's almost like a Tai Chi kind of dance thing. I've met like maybe 3 or 4 other people in 15 years that have had that.
I've never heard of that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay, I'm back here again. I might be the densest person here. However, when you say went to spontaneous yoga poses, you just struck pose? Oh my God. Okay. That's what I wanted to know.
I know, see, a lot of it sounds really, I mean, if it didn't happen to me,
Yeah.
I would
yeah.
be thinking, mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I was just curious, want to make sure that's what I wanted
And,
to
you know, again, I was such a pragmatic mother. I mean, I was very, you know, I was a kindergarten teacher and a mother of 3 and very not at all.
So because my curiosity is great, did you do this like in a supermarket, or did it matter, or
At home.
At home only. Good. Okay. Good to hear. All right, that's what I wanted to know. Anyone else have a question now that I have the microphone?
Hi, Nancy. My name is David. Sometimes when I'm in healing sessions, I have what you might refer to as sympathetic pains. Like I know my elbow's nothing wrong with it, and all of a sudden it just starts hurting. And then, you know, call out who has a problem with their elbow, and there'll be someone. Do you ever experience that, or you just always see what's going on?
Well, I'll tell you, my mother had a heart attack, and right after she had a heart attack, I went to the cardiologist because I was having sympathetic pains, and I thought I was having a heart attack, which I knew intellectually I wasn't. But I think for me, I feel more, I feel things that are close, but you know, people that are close to me that are at a distance, I can feel that kind of stuff. My sister-in-law died at the age of 27. She fell off her horse and split her skull open. And before that happened, I started getting this heat down the back of my head. And I went to my acupuncturist and I said, Barbara, I think there's something wrong with my head. I keep feeling this incredible pain and heat going down the back of my head. So that would be an example of that. But if someone comes into my healing table and I see them right away, I can either see it here or I can feel it in my body. But I don't go to any extremes because my body's already given me enough pain. So I try to keep it separate.
Oh, we're running short on our time because we don't want to go too long. And I do have a person over here. So we were going to do one more question.
Okay.
All right.
Hi, my name is Susan.
Hi, Susan.
I was wondering if you have been called to teach others more in depth because lots of people are kind of superficial and don't know the process. So have you thought of that?
Teaching what specifically?
Well, specifically more about how you get into this state and accessing it for healing. So your vision of the scanning of the table is the wave of the future, and it is through light and sound waves. And have you considered becoming or participating in teaching younger people how to do that?
Well, what I do at my healings oftentimes is I'll invite people's loved ones to come to the healings with them. So I put them right down at the bottom of the table. I give them the short version of bringing light in through your head so they can experience what it's like. And I also do that in my healing meditation workshops where I'll teach a meditation and then I'll have somebody stand behind, have people pair up and do it that way. But I have not taught any formal classes, 6-week classes on healing or anything like that, no. Thank you.
And that should just about do it. Anybody else have, Howard, you
What
got
a
anything you want to
beautiful
say?
audience. Thank you.